Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, Ewan from What Culture, joined as ever by the bodacious Josh Brown.
Oh, hello.
To talk to you today about some leaked Infinity Saga images from the leaked deleted scenes that we weren't allowed to see when the Infinity Saga box set came out last year.
There's like 4 levels of leaks here, and I kind of dig it because I feel like a genuine spy, you know, in a
Exactly. Marvel are just secreting these leaks everywhere, and they're getting everywhere, and some really interesting stuff has emerged. Obviously, if you've been keeping up with the Infinity Saga or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, whatever, for ages, and I'm assuming that you have, you'll know that a bunch of stuff didn't actually make it into the final films. Loads of stuff was left on the cutting room floor. Stuff more trivial than other stuff, but some of the really interesting things would have changed the way the saga was kind of set up. And one of the big ones was that in Avengers Age of Ultron, of course, Joss Whedon originally wanted Captain Marvel to make her kind of big MCU debut at the end of the film when Captain America and Black Widow are briefing the new Avengers, which of course in the final version was Scarlet Witch and the Falcon, and I'm sure someone else, and Vision as well.
Yes.
So yeah.
This one's interesting, so I remember this being talked about at the time, and obviously now we've got our first look at who was actually cast as sort of Captain Marvel, or who was at least standing in for it.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking about that scene in general, because when that happened in the movie, I remember being in the cinema and kind of already being a bit like, I don't know, confused about what was going on. I feel like the end of Age of Ultron was so sudden, you know, with Tony Stark retiring or whatever and getting this new band
You
of
retired in
heroes.
Iron Man 3, mate. Why are you doing it again?
You can't just keep doing it, you know, like a professional boxer or something. But I remember being a bit confused by the new team, and had I just seen this brand new random character, I'd have been even more a bit like, what's going on? Who are these people? Why should I care? And I think that's the main point of, at that point in time, why should you have cared about Captain Marvel coming in at the end of Age of Ultron, which isn't her story? It would have felt a bit tacked on. It would have been an interest. It would have changed the MCU entirely, but I think it's probably a great move that apparently Kevin Feige got his way just when Joss Whedon really wanted her in, and he was like, we're not going to do that, dude. Get Scarlet Witch in instead.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense that this didn't end up being a final thing because, you know, Captain Marvel is an incredibly important character, and just to have her in at the end of the whole thing is kind of a little bit like, okay. Because then obviously after that, then you have Captain America Civil War, which, you know, is about all this idea, you know, you've got the new Avengers going up against kind of, you know, Tony Stark's pro-registration forces or whatever. It would kind of be a little bit weird to have Captain Marvel in there, who is this big, powerful, cosmic character, getting really politically invested in this little kind of spat that wouldn't really concern her, I think. So I think the route that they've gone with and ultimately has been for the better, even though it is really interesting to see the stand-in actress who appeared in Avengers Age of Ultron at the end there. So apparently in that final sequence when Scarlet Witch appears, they kind of just keyed over the stand-in actress of Captain Marvel, and that's kind of the same thing. When she's floating down, originally it was meant to be Captain Marvel.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's interesting that that was such a late in the day addition. Like, they had the same plate that they used for Captain Marvel, and then they, like you said, just included Scarlet Witch instead and gave her this sort of grand entrance, which does make more sense because obviously Civil War was about to start shooting, I think Feige said a few weeks afterwards. So that's a nice little, you know, transition from one movie to the next. And it would have been weird to not have Scarlet Witch there, considering how prominent of a role that she played in the next couple of films. Obviously, she's really big in Civil War. Like, her relationship with Vision is, you know, completely ripped my heart out in Infinity War. And it's kind of odd to think about an MCU where she wasn't introduced at the end as an Avenger in Age of Ultron. It's just, you forget, considering how much of a well-oiled machine the MCU in general is, that things still happen to it like that happened on, you know, Star Wars, where things, plot developments and characters, there's so many to juggle that last minute, you know, changes and alterations like this happen all the time. There's one we're going to get to about the Hulk in Infinity War.
Yes, we are.
And, you know, apparently Professor Hulk was going to be introduced in that movie in the climax, which again would have changed everything radically.
In the image that we have of this so far, in the description that was in the Reddit thread, it basically looks as though when, you know, Bruce Banner is having his erect Hulkile dysfunction, and he can't get the Hulk to come out, they basically have a conversation inside the Hulkbuster armor, I think when they're getting torn apart by the Outriders, and then they just have a dialogue, and like Hulk and Banner are like, okay, let's they start shouting at each other. You know those arguments where you're shouting and you both agree while you're shouting,
and it's just
like, what are we doing? And then he comes out and he's Professor Hulk. And to be honest, I think that would have been fine, but when you've got Infinity War ending the way it did, when you've just had everyone else die, and it's just Professor Hulk just being like, hello, I'm here now, it wouldn't really make much sense. So I much prefer the introduction he gets in Endgame where he's at the restaurant restaurant, and it's really funny.
Yeah, I mean, there's a transcript of what the dialogue was going to be like in that deleted scene, and it kind of doesn't really explain how they would have merged the personalities. It just sort of happens, which would have been a decent explanation, but for me, I like that after the events of Infinity War, they spent the next 5 years trying to, come up with a solution of how they can merge these two identities. And even though it is perhaps, played off as a bit of comic relief in Endgame, I think it works. I think that moment where you do see Professor Hulk, he's just there. It emphasizes the jump in time and that things really have changed between those two films. So ultimately, as much of a triumphant fist-pumping moment Professor Hulk would have been in Infinity War, I feel like it makes sense that it was saved for the Endgame, whereas you don't want to dilute the power of the downbeat ending of the first part.
Yeah, another interesting point to consider here now as well. I think if you cast your mind back to our coverage of Infinity War, which was 2 years ago now, you'd have seen me crying on camera about, where's Hawkeye? I don't see Hawkeye. What's going on with Hawkeye? Because yes, people do care about that character. And originally he was meant to be in the film. We've actually gotten an image here of CGI Jeremy Renner. Oh god, it looks so terrifying. He's just like a waxy, just a thing, just in his farm with his bow, just doing that.
Remember the meme from last year where it was sort of like, the waxy CGI Jeremy Renner can't hurt you, and then you see waxy CGI Jeremy Renner and you're like, this thing is going to kill me in my sleep.
Yes.
That's what I think about every single time I see it, and I can only look at it once before I came in here, so it might be around here somewhere, and I hope it isn't, because it's just traumatizing.
It's lurking in the ceiling in the corner, like the spider from that Jake Gyllenhaal film.
Exactly like that.
Exactly. But yeah, it's interesting because he in the Reddit thread they say that this was him defending Vision, but I'm fairly certain he's on his farm ranch in this image. You can see kind of the old rustic walls in the background, and obviously in Infinity War, Vision was only ever either in Edinburgh or in Wakanda. So yeah, I think it makes much more sense what they did with Hawkeye in Endgame on his murder gap year, and then he comes back and he's Ronin and stuff. I think they did ultimately more with him there, even though like him not being around in Infinity War is a tad jarring, because it's just kind of like, this is a big old thing, like you probably want the guy who can go thwip if you want it.
It's one of those things where, like, at the time, we obviously had the whole "Where's Hawkeye" hashtag going off, and people were genuinely like, how can this, cataclysmic universal event be happening? And Hawkeye's just, he's managed to miss it all. But then I do think
mayonnaise in his hot dogs.
Exactly, probably. He's just chilling out, having barbecues on his little ranch. But I do think it makes, again, it makes Endgame a better movie, because then you open on that somber note of him losing his family, which follows nicely into his murder gap year, like you said. But I do feel like it's cool that when obviously Marvel were making those movies, even though they were treated as not part 1 and part 2, I like that they've had the foresight to be able to think about which elements are going to work better on which movie, and then ultimately make each individual part the most satisfying it can be. I don't want to keep going back to Star Wars in these videos, but it feels like the opposite of Star Wars, if that makes sense. That long-term planning and that long-term thinking about what we're going to do in this movie, how that's going to thread into the next, just pays off so well. But it does make me wonder, going back to the Hulk for a second, because when we saw the first trailers for Infinity War and the Hulk was obviously there, we all thought that it was a clever bit of, sleight of hand or a clever illusion.
Professor Hulk.
Yeah, do you think
that's an interesting point to consider, actually. Maybe that was like they had him at the end there. He would have been Professor Hulking out at that point. That's a very interesting point to consider. We'll move on to the next ones very quickly, though. One particularly interesting one is stuff from Odin in Thor: The Dark World. And in the Reddit thread, they mentioned now in this version, it would have been where Loki legit died, and it would have been Odin around, the actual Odin around at the end where he's walking around through Earth. Not to be confused with the stuff from Thor: Ragnarok, where he was originally meant to be in New York, and they changed it to where he was in Norway. But yeah, originally there was a version of Thor: The Dark World where Odin would have basically kind of carried on, and Loki would not have lived, which is a kind of wild thing to consider, given Thor: The Dark World is a pretty pooey film, and Loki had so many more good things to come in the franchise.
How late in the game was this? Because when I saw it, I've done the same mistake that I think you were just warning everyone about there, and I thought it was from Ragnarok instead, where, like you said, Odin was supposed to be on Earth. How would that have worked? How would you have two wildly different movies, one where Loki actually dies and one where Loki does not die?
I think Marvel must have a contingency for when their actors are bored. It's like, we think Tom's a bit bored here. We'll have a contingency death for him here, and he'll be like, yes, I'm finally out the game, and they'll be like, hey, joke's on you, we cut it.
How about you have your own Disney Plus show instead? Whoa, can we tempt you back?
Why can't I leave? But yeah, moving on to the next one. One of the more interesting ones, I think we'll talk about briefly the flashback of Ant-Man and the Wasp Wasp. I think it was meant to be in the sequel where you actually have a detailed flashback of young Hank Pym and young Janet Van Dyne, basically kind of doing their Cold War espionage stuff. It's very CGI Irish Winnie face syndrome, but I guess because it's a deleted scene, they would have spent more time on the thing if it was actually in the final film. So you got them going on, and then the coolest one I think here, even though I did kind of like what they did with it in Captain Marvel, is an actual comics accurate version of the Supreme Intelligence, the big floating head with the tentacles coming out. It looks really, really cool.
It did, right? Like, again, looking at the ones still we've got, it looks mad. It looks like something that I, as someone who doesn't know much about Captain Marvel, would expect to see in something like, Guardians of the Galaxy or Doctor Strange or one of the wackier ones, rather than the end result of Captain Marvel, which I thought was kind of more regular sci-fi. You had like the suits and stuff. Ewan, how would this have worked? How would this have translated?
Well, the thing is, I think they still could have done this in the film, because obviously, spoilers if you haven't seen Captain Marvel, but you know that the reason why the Supreme Intelligence basically appears as the person that each Kree respects the most, and obviously in the film it's revealed that it's the original Marvel, who's actually the person who Carol's idolized. But I think at the end when Carol reveals who she kind of turns against the Kree, I think it would have been a really scary moment if then it revealed itself as this big tentacly monstrosity as it is in the comics, just this big gaping, just like. I think that would have been really, really cool. Maybe they were worried that people would have been really confused. It's like, okay, you've got this kind of, this AI almost thing. Why is it also appearing as this organic monster?
That's true, but at the same time, I do want to see the already scary Annette Bening turn into, this Lovecraftian mass of, flesh and horror. That would have made the ending of Captain Marvel quite interesting.
Yes, maybe have No Doubt playing on the background at the same time.
Why not?
Yeah, please let us know what you think of these MCU deleted scenes down in the comments below. Do you want to see the full footage at some point in the future? I know that I'm really curious to see, even if it's just a really bad animatic of the Kree thing just going, because that sounds interesting. Please be sure to go back to whatculture.com where you can find more news, lists, and articles like this. And of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because it really, really, really does help us out. And if you don't, it'll make Josh Brown sad.
It will do, yeah. Genuinely, so you've got that in your conscience if you don't hit that bell, I'm afraid.
Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter at EwanRunesThings. You can follow Josh on Twitter at
Josh Brune with 2 O's.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.